are beautiful. You were so right. When I got on the website and was learning more about this wonderful organization, I looked at all the audience pictures and I just started feeling very insecure. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Joel told me that everyone who's here is skipping something. So thank you for skipping whatever to be here. Thank you to Creative Mornings DC, to Joel for your invitation, and for the whole team, for the Helsinki team, for choosing this topic. It's actually a fascinating and appropriate choice. Helsinki is the site of the Helsinki Accords, a phenomenally significant international treaty signed by then President Gerald Ford in 1976, which was responsible for creating space to talk about human rights between the former Eastern Bloc and the Western nations. It provided the underpinnings and undergirdings for many of the freedom movements in Eastern Europe. Václav Havel, Natan Sharansky, Lech Walesa depended on, used wisely, and gave thanks for the Helsinki Accord. So Helsinki is continuing this amazing tradition of engaging through compassion. So it's good to be here. Now, identifying oneself as a speaker on compassion is really a daunting task. I mean, what? I'm an expert on nice? But it's also exhilarating because it's given me the opportunity to think long and hard about a quality that I believe is so necessary for our world today. Figuring out what it is, and most importantly, what it means to me, has been a lifelong pursuit. When I was starting back my own professional life, way, way back in the darkness of time, I participated in a professional development course in which we were asked to write our life's mission statement. And if you've never done that, it's an exercise that I would recommend to you. I thought long and hard about it, and I wrote something that even then surprised me. You know, I thought I was going to write about being a famous actress or contributing to world peace, and instead I ended up writing something that holds very true still today. I wrote to create something of beauty and to make a difference in the life of one person. The beauty part was relatively easy. The difference in one life, well, that's the story that I'll tell you today. I'm not going to present a scholarly analysis of compassion because there are plenty of them out there, and many of them contradict one another. For example, some studies will say that compassion among young people is declining, but then others will say that volunteerism among high school students is increasing. Median income in the United States is on the rise for the second year in a row. Homelessness is growing in major cities around the world. Charitable giving is increasing, but at the same time, a growing number of individuals working in the helping professions report compassion fatigue. And then what about the complexity of the terminology? Compassion, empathy, what's the difference? And if so, which one is the greater virtue? Instead, I'll be personal. I'll give you a little bit of structure. I'm a professor, so I kind of have to have an outline. But mostly I'll tell you about stories about my own stumblings towards understanding compassion and about the men and women who helped me get there. Some historic, some very close to me. And through these stories, I hope to offer a few concrete observations, takeaways to guide you as you continue your own discoveries towards compassion. Three powerful influences figure quite prominently along my journey. I'll introduce them now, and they will weave themselves into my talk in the next 20 minutes. The first was a mother who started off her life as the daughter of immigrant farmers in upstate New York and knew what it was like to get her hands dirty. She ended up studying fashion design in Paris, spoke 7 languages, as was a beautiful hostess and facilitator to my father's Foreign Service career. The second influence has been my own career in international human rights, most specifically in working to end human trafficking. This has introduced me to beauties and beasts, heroes and villains on 5 continents. And the third is my marriage to a very good man. And you'll learn more about all of these. So I'd like to show a few pictures before I get started. I searched the web for images responding to keywords, compassion and acts of compassion. What interested me was the numbers of pictures that involving soldiers in wartime. There were also a lot of pictures of kittens and puppies and smiley faces, but I was more concerned with the human factors. Maybe it's because, regarding the soldiers, maybe it's because against the cruelty and chaos of war, small gestures of compassion become greatly amplified. I do have one soldier picture, but there are also a few others. My focus here is on real stories of real people, folks just like you and me. So the first picture obviously needs no introduction. Mother Teresa has become an iconic representation of compassion. She lived out her life with the poorest of poor. She spent her time touching bodies teeming with maggots, disease, infection, and challenging others to find a place of caring, perhaps doing the same thing in their own hearts. Everyone she touched died. This was not a results-based approach to showing compassion. She's misunderstood by some, criticized by others, but her legacy lives on. In these days of declining religious vocation, Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity have expanded to 139 countries with over 6,000 members, and that number will surely grow now that she has become a saint. All right, there are two boys rescuing a dog. These two young boys were walking along a canal when they saw a dog in distress. Because the dog was tired and the embankment steep, the animal wasn't able to crawl out. So the boys used what they had, their wits, a shoulder bag, and their own strength to rescue the dog. Let's think about what could have happened. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they were afraid, a little bit nervous. Maybe one wanted to stop and the other didn't, and they kind of argued back and forth because, boys always argue back and forth. Or maybe they both decided to help at the same time. I wonder how many times they had to try before they finally got the dog out of the water. And they did. And then here's the soldier picture. We don't know anything about this soldier or what he endured prior to this picture. Was there fighting? Was he in danger? The chances are probably yes. What we see is the bowing of a head, the pulling of an arm. We can almost feel warm breath breathing life and comfort. It's not about the soldier, is it? So what is compassion? Everyone weighs in on a definition, from the great religions to philosophers to wellness experts. I'm a linguist by academic training, and that's a whole other story. And I love the study of the origins of words. Words are made up of distinct segments of meaning. There's usually a root at the center, which is preceded by a prefix that helps to alter and shape and amplify the value of the root, and it's concluded by a suffix which gives the function of the word. Is it an adverb? Is it an adjective? Is it a noun? A word needs to be understood as the sum of its parts. It's kind of like us. We need to be understood as the sum of our work and our families and our relationships and our interests. Words also are extremely complex and extremely relational. In compassion, we start with the root word, pati in Latin, morphing into patio in Old French, meaning suffering. The core meaning of this root is then modified, morphed by the addition of the prefix com, which we find in words like communicate, commiserate, community, communion, compatriot. Whether it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, the meaning remains the same: with, together, in association with. Compassion means to share in the sufferings of another with the aim to do something about it. So what are the implications? What are the implications of this? From the definition, we can draw 3 conclusions. The first is that compassion is a choice. A choice to do what exactly? To look, to listen, to feel, to act. While we are motivated by feelings, and that's where this starts for most of us, compassion becomes an imperative that requires us to put the needs of others above ourselves. Reflect on the image of the child that we saw. It was all about the child. The second is that compassion is a shared experience. In all of the 3 pictures you just saw, and the ones that will come next, the individuals was never alone. There was always an other involved, whether the 2 boys together were helping a dog, whether it was one soldier helping a child. We show compassion to another person. Compassion is an expression of our relationship with the world around us. It's also transactional. Something happens when we engage in acts of compassion. If we attempt to show compassion out of a sense of superiority, if we try to exact a price rather than look for a relationship, we become puppeteers, manipulating others for our own satisfaction. The third point to remember is that showing compassion is usually messy, complicated, and hard. Now let's talk a little bit about each one. First, compassion is a choice. I'd always been something of a do-gooder. My brother and I were raised believing that working for the public good was a high calling, worthy of the best people. And for me, I thought it would be a school teacher. So I got a job as a public middle school teacher working with learning disabled students in a pilot vocational skills program in an inner city. This was the first time in my life I was threatened with a deadly weapon. So, somewhat disillusioned with my ability to have any real impact in that particular situation, I became a school administrator, which proved even more disillusioning. Eventually, I got involved into the educational policy arena, which was all right, but eventually I began to feel the pull of the world. Once again, as a Foreign Service kid, finally moving back to the United States, we tend to want to stay put for a while, but invariably, we can't. And so in 1996, I moved to Israel to learn more about my family's Jewish roots and to volunteer in a center that assisted new immigrants from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. I started teaching at the University of Haifa, also working with immigrant students. And one day, in a special briefing for teachers of immigrants, a social worker told us that those of us who had Russian girls in our class, we tended to lump all people from the former Soviet Union into that great amorphous category of Russians. The social worker told us that about 25% of these young women either had been involved or would become involved in sex work. This news stunned me. And while I didn't go out and do anything about it right away, it stayed with me. And I didn't forget until one Saturday afternoon on the Haifa beach. I was picnicking with a group of friends and colleagues who, like me, were all doing good things, helping immigrants. And I saw a friend drive up and walk towards the parking lot to greet her. She got out of her car, walked around, and opened the passenger door. Outstepped the most exotic young woman I had ever seen in my life. Whereas we were all dressed for a picnic by the sea with, flowing clothes and bathing suits and bandanas in our hair, she was wrapped barely in skin-tight spandex, and she made her way across the sand in precariously high platform shoes. Her blonde hair cascaded over her head, refusing to be tamed, and she chain smoked. None of us smoked. Who was she? I had to know. I had to know who she was. And so in our smatterings of Russian and Hebrew and sign language common to women everywhere, I learned her story. I learned that her name was Olga, that she was 23 from the Ukraine, a mother with 2 young children back in her home country and the sole support of elderly parents who had lost their government pensions. In the economic devastation following the dissolution of the former Soviet Union, millions were left without jobs, pensions, or support structures. Desperate, Olga replied yes to the question, want a job? From someone she never knew, someone who offered her a high-paying job as a glamorous hostess in a resort hotel in Eilat in the south of Israel. Instead, after being gang raped over several days to break her in, she was forced to prostitute herself on the streets in the Port District of Haifa. After Olga told me her story, she stopped and looked at me. She knew I couldn't do anything to help her, and she was waiting for me to come to that same realization. I reached out. I wanted to touch her at least. She pulled away gently, looked at me with an expression of very deep pity, and turned and with remarkable elegance made her way back across the sand and into the streets. The rest of the afternoon for me passed within a blur. When I got home, I could only sit in silent horror. The world seemed irrevocably broken at that time. How could people, mothers pushing baby carriages, couples for a walk, kids coming home from school, people picking up newspapers, how could they walk by Olga and not care? How was it that this young mother was standing on the street waiting for sailors, the highest bidding sailor? There was nothing I could do, and I was overwhelmed with my own helplessness. I didn't even understand what the problem was, so how could I think about a solution? And in the days following, her image haunted me, and slowly a deep resolve would began to form. I would learn whatever I could about what was happening and do something about it. And that became my life. Think of people throughout history. Gandhi was thrown off a train for being the wrong color. He ended up achieving independence for his country. Václav Havel protested the silencing of an alternative rock group in Prague, the Purple People of the Universe. Went to prison and launched Charter 77, helping to bring about the liberation not only of his own country, but which had a profound effect on Lech Walesa and the Solidarity movement in Poland. When were you presented with a choice to enter into the suffering of another and do something about it? What did you choose? Second, compassion is relational and transactional. And as such, the way we engage with others is just as important as the outcome. At George Washington University, I teach a course on dissident movement. It's called Dissent, a Study in Memoirs, where we read first-person narratives of some of the great dissidents of the 20th century. We start with Gandhi, and we talk about our lives. I think it's a pretty cool course. Without a doubt, the men and the women whose work we read have demonstrated lives of tremendous compassion, sacrifice, and selflessness in response to great suffering, and whose acts of peaceful resistance were as much acts of compassion as the rescue of a child. Desmond Tutu, Martin Luther King Jr., Shireen Ebadi, Wangari Maathai changed the course of history because they were motivated by the sufferings of their people and acted with compassion. They acted carefully. In particular, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and to some extent also Václav Havel, articulated very clearly what we would define their terms of engagement with others. They formulated rules of conduct for their followers to guide them as they went about their work. And these rules included prescriptions for private and public behaviors, in particularly how they would relate to people who willed them harm, violent, physical, abusive harm. Without this compassionate treatment of others, taking on the form of respect and civility, their larger efforts would not have succeeded. According to MLK Jr., every volunteer was required to sign a code of conduct, and he actually called it the 10 Commandments. There were 10. I won't read all of them, but I'll identify a few. Remember that nonviolent movements seek justice and reconciliation, relationships, not victory, results. Walk and talk in the manner of love. Sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. Seek to perform, that means actively chase out regular service for others and for the world. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that change would come through civility, kindness, and compassion in relationships. I learned I learned this lesson a very hard way. It seems like that's the only way I tend to learn lessons. So, you know, I'm sure the universe laughs every time it decides to put me in these particular situations. I learned it when I was sitting on the street corner in Managua, Nicaragua, in the very early hours of the morning, probably between 3 and 4 a.m., with a group of workers from an anti-trafficking NGO. It was the first night I had ever gone out into the streets to talk to prostituted women and girls. Most of the clients had gone home, and the pimps didn't mind if we stopped to talk. One very sassy young lady came up to me and started talking. She asked, was I married? No, not then. And she was surprised. Did you go to school? Did I have children? No. So then I tried. Do you go to school? No. Where are you from? Place I had never heard about, and the conversation really wasn't going anywhere. And as she sat, also frustrated next to me, all sorts of things kept going on inside my head. What in the world did I think I was doing with my life if I couldn't find a way to talk to the very women I wanted to help? This was another one of these moments when my life seemed like just an abject and utter failure, and I was convinced that everything I was doing was a fraud. But I kept thinking, oh, one more chance, please, one more chance. And I looked over and I saw her hands. They were beautifully manicured. Without thinking, I reached over, took her fingers, brought them up to my face and said, oh, you have such pretty nails. And you know, it was this ultimate, basic, real human connection which brought a huge smile to her face, laughter to both of us. And we ended up sitting on that street corner under a light, talking for over an hour. Has there been a time when you should have looked for the fingernails and didn't? Finally, the third is that showing compassion is usually messy, complicated, and hard. Okay, this is not a stock picture, it's one of mine. But before I get to that, it's a quick story about my mother. For years, we lived in West Africa where my father was getting USAID off the ground. My mother volunteered with Catholic Relief, and we would frequently go out with the parish priest into villages to distribute food and clothes. Always wanted to jump in. Mom would invariably follow the women into the huts, and there they would sit on the ground, eat whatever food was available, and talk about children, men, and dirty houses. You know, at a price. My brother and I always knew that Mom had been out into the bush country because we'd get home from school to the big production of delousing the house. The result of my mother's good works was an afternoon of stripping sheets, washing linens, and special stinky shampoo for us. So I learned at a very early age to associate good deeds with a degree of chaos, and it was one of the best lessons I ever learned. Back to the picture. The blonde lady in the middle is a dear friend. Her name is Lauren Bethel. She's an American Baptist ordained minister who's focused her life on working with exploited women and children. Hers is not a 9-to-5 job. Instead, it's something that she lives, and it has inextricably linked her life with that of two Czech women. she's sitting between Sasha Kampova in the red sweater on the right and Denitsa, Sasha's daughter, in black. Sasha was trafficked to the Netherlands from the Czech Republic in a story that parallels in many ways the one I told you about Olga. Eventually, she wanted to bring her daughter, whom she had left behind, to live with her, and in order to do so, her pimp required a lot of extra money. For a time, she told me she was servicing over 30 clients a night in order to bring her daughter back. That's an act of compassion. Sasha was rescued from the windows by a Dutch cab driver named Michele, who saw her while driving her clients in and out. He felt in his heart that she didn't belong there, and he was able to obtain her release. But love doesn't always make life easy. Sasha made do in her life, raised her daughter, and cared for Michele's children. But eventually, she studied to get a counseling degree, but was diagnosed with leukemia. She had been given a bone marrow transplant, but the doctors said it didn't work, and her body was tired, so was her heart. She couldn't fight hard enough, and on February 12, 2008, she died. Denitsa stayed with her stepfather for a while, but his own grief dominated the relationship and took over his feelings. Lauren stepped in, and for the past 9 years, has been Denitsa's home, heart, and center. It's not been easy, but the choices that Lauren made years prior, the commitment of her relationship to the world, have created a capacity for sustained commitment at great cost. And finally, there's one last picture that I'll show where everything we're talking about comes together. But first, a backstory. In 2008, a farmer named Gary and his late wife Sabrina moved from New Hampshire to Washington, D.C. to become involved in farm policy and advocacy. One day, while waiting for the MARC train at BWI to Union Station, Sabrina struck up a conversation with a young woman who was from Rwanda. Her name was Fraha. That conversation extended to dinner at Sabrina's home and eventually an invitation to stay with us until you get things sorted out. Fraha was a survivor of the genocide. She saw her parents being hacked to death in the bushes. She escaped to Uganda, and in the Great March, the Kigali to Kampala March, had a baby, and eventually a daughter got a job as an orphanage in order to be able to place her daughter somewhere because she couldn't afford to feed her. So at least they both had food and shelter. One day, a representative from a Ugandan UN diplomat came and said they were looking for a house servant, a domestic, to move to the United States. You can make lots of money, you'll learn English, you'll come back a rich lady. You can take care of your daughter. You want a job? She said yes. And for several years, she was trafficked, and she was a domestic slave. She finally escaped, and through a long story, made her way found herself as an asylee, and now she's a legal citizen on that MARC train platform. When she met Gary and Sabrina, she had been able to apply. She was on her way. Gary and Sabrina realized quickly that the idea of short term was a mythical construct. For Fraha, they had become family. And so it was. It included celebrating her citizenship and a laborious process to bring Tracy to the United States, teach her basic literacy skills, and get her settled into school. It also included Sabrina's heroic battle with breast cancer and her all too early death. Gary and Sabrina were my neighbors and friends. I was one of Tracy's tutors and walked her to school when others couldn't. I was Sabrina's chemo buddy, walking her home from Foggy Bottom after each and every treatment. Life is, at its heart, redemptive. Eventually, I married Gary. And Tracy was the one attendant at our wedding. And now, as we get ready to move to New Hampshire, Tracy will come with us. And the little girl, who's the daughter of a trafficking survivor who grew up in an orphanage, will live on a 120-acre farm and play with dogs and horses and will have a chance to heal. Yes, yes, compassion is inconvenient and hard and sometimes messy, but I would not have lived my life any other way. Remember 3 things. Compassion is a choice. What choice is beckoning you? Remember that it's a relationship. Who is calling to you? Remember that it's messy, but what are you afraid of? You won't regret it. I'd like to tell you about, just very briefly, because our sponsors have let me do this. I work for an organization called ArtWorks for Freedom, and some of you are probably wondering now, gosh, this trafficking thing, we hear about it. Can we do anything about it? What is it? How can I learn more? For the next month, ArtWorks for Freedom is sponsoring Action DC, a month-long arts-based campaign to raise awareness of and inspire action to end human trafficking. All over the city, there will be art exhibits, dance performances, film screenings at DC public libraries, participatory arts activities. There were flyers on the table as you came out, and opportunities to learn, to jump in, to get into, to do. We've developed a 30 Days of Action web-based toolkit, which will help you figure out what real actions are. But there's amazing art, amazing artists. Survivors participate in this. Andy Shalal at Busboys and Poets has opened 2 of his spaces for us on the 8th and the 9th of October. So please look for more information. Please come. We'd love to see you, all of you there. Some of you put cards in a jar, and if somebody wants to bring that jar to me, I'll draw them. We'd love to make 2 tickets available to our to the premiere, the launch on Thursday night at Hotel W's POV. DJ Spooky will be there, and he's going to be presenting an original composition about human trafficking. And so, completely randomly, Dave Tashler? And I'll just let you, I'm going to keep this because I'm glad you're excited. Thanks for that response. So all I need is your email, but no, stay, because you'll get, close your eyes, and out of this you get, yeah, pick a card, any card. Yeah. Christine McFadden Crosby. So I will email you details and information, and we'll be sure to put your name on the list. And tell your friends and come. We hope to see you. Thank you. You have been a great audience. I have enjoyed it. There was a beautiful electric chemistry in this room, and I think that some of you have taken this in, and you're thinking about the amazing choices that are going to radicalize your life forever. Thank you.